Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Issues of the Heart podcast. I'm your host, Brother Kobe.
And I'm Rogers.
Again, we're laying a foundation for the book of Daniel. We're, continuing on in Daniel chapter 1. And we just want to, kind of go over some of the details of Daniel 1 and bring out certain lessons that are there, certain things that we can look to. One of the things that Daniel chapter 1 brings us to a pivotal time in Jewish history. They've gone into this captivity to the Babylonians. Now, this captivity to the Babylonians kind of loom large uh, in the experience of the Jewish people in the Old Testament. Several books just deal with that whole sequence, and we get a picture through the book of Daniel of what some of that captivity experience was like under the king Nebuchadnezzar. And we understand then also what brought us to, or brought them to that position of being there was simply a disregard of the things of God, virtually going after heathen ways, and they have forgotten the commission that God had given to them as a nation, that they should be a witness to the nations. God said, through your seed, all nations will be blessed. And they forgot that they were to be a manifestation of the blessings of God upon the people, and what would be the result of that, so that the nations would look at them and said, "Oh, this is a wise and understanding people who has so great a God as this people." And they began to internalize all the things of God, which led to selfishness, self-boasting, and the confidence um, that they should not have had in themselves. And they begin to look down on these other people, these other nations. And so God was of the mindset, all right, if you're not going to go to them and be a witness to them, I'm going to bring you to them, or bring them to you, in a sense, and take you into captivity. And so now you have to live amongst them, and I'm going to exhibit my power through you as a nation. And so the book of Daniel kind of picks up on that train, which is interesting, where Nebuchadnezzar raided the temple and took some of the vessels from the house of God, and he placed it in the house of his God. And that's something that they would do, almost showing, not only did we conquer you, but our gods conquered your God. And that sets the stage that, again, not to look at this from a purely temporal, earthly manner, but this is a great controversy going on, because Nebuchadnezzar is then making this boast that the gods that they serve, essentially, which would be Satan, which they themselves weren't trying to quote unquote worship Satan, but the gods that they worship were representatives of Satan. And so Satan is saying through them, we've defeated not just you, but we've defeated your God. We've won this victory. And so we shouldn't look at it in the standpoint of, oh, this is just some battle between earthly nations, but understand the bigger picture that is beyond. So as we set this stage, we want to just look at some principles from the book of Daniel, and understand certain things to say. One of the things that stood out to me just from the very get-go. Nebuchadnezzar said this, beginning in verse 3. He says, "And the king spake to Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of his princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and tongue of the Chaldees." Now, it's interesting, there was a prophecy that Isaiah gave. Remember, the king Hezekiah, he had caught this illness, and Isaiah told him to set your house in order, you're going to die. He begins to weep and pray before God, and God sent the prophet Isaiah back before he can get out the house clean. He was sent back to tell him, I'm going to lengthen your days to 15 years. And so he did that. During that time, God was going to give a sign. And in giving that sign to Hezekiah, it caught the attention of the Babylonians. And so they wanted to inquire about this. They wanted to learn about his God, but instead of him telling them about his God, he then wanted to show them his stuff. All right. So when they left, Isaiah came back and said, "Hey, who came to visit you? And what did you tell them?" And so he said, "Well, they came because they saw this sign, but I showed them this and I showed them that." And Isaiah was like, "Well, you didn't tell them about God. That's really who they came to inquire of. And you showed them your stuff." And, you know, in that we can learn a lesson about what do we make our boast in. Do we just boast in our things? Look at the house I have, look at the car I have, look at how much money I make. And so that's not what we should boast in. Our boast should be in the goodness of God, his transformative power, the grace of God working in our lives, and how he has changed us. Now he moves in different ways. And so he said, because of this, your seed will become captives in the land of Babylon. And, right here we see a fulfillment of that in the book of Daniel. Now, one of the things here is that I really want to bring out is that Nebuchadnezzar said, "No, I want the best of the best people to be able to stand in before me in my palace." And now he had a certain standard, and children that had no blemish, skillful in wisdom, knowledge, and so forth, cunning in the sciences. He had this high standard for those who were to stand in his presence, and he had a blueprint, a plan to prepare them for that 3-year course, to get them to have the ability, the wisdom, and not just mental, but the spiritual and also the physical, to stand in his presence. Now, it's interesting to me that we think that this heathen king, as we will call him, would have this standard for people to stand in his presence, yet we think less of God, that God doesn't have a standard, or that he has a lower standard than that. That if we think that we're going to stand in God's presence, we're going to be in God's kingdom throughout eternity, that all we have to do is just believe, no matter how you live, you can carry on business as usual, just as long as you profess faith in Jesus, that's good enough with him. If this pagan king had a standard for those that were going to stand in his presence, and had a blueprint, a plan to get them to there, why do we think any less of God? Is this heathen king wiser or have a greater standard than our God would have? God says that when he comes back, he's coming back with a church without blemish, this have no spot or wrinkle or any such thing. That now unto him that is able to keep you from falling and to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. That's Jude chapter 1, verse 24. When you look in the book of Revelation, it's interesting. He talks about this great group, this 144,000, that they're without guile, no blemish, that they have kept themselves from women, so to speak. These are virgins. It's interesting that he says that. Yet we know that Daniel and his associates were eunuchs, meaning that they had not known women as well. But the standard of what it takes to be in God's presence. But there was a plan set in place to get them mentally, spiritually, and physically to a position where the king would examine them, and instead, once they pass that examination, will bring them into his presence to see if they will be able to stand. And we think that God doesn't have a plan, that he doesn't have a blueprint to give us the ability by his grace to stand in his presence. In other words, religiously, Nebuchadnezzar felt that his gods were greater, that if you come into the worship of my God, then, they had names, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that was a constant reminder of their duty to their God. Nebuchadnezzar religiously understood, like, I'm not going to force them into worshiping my gods, because I might turn men into martyrs. And so they might be willing to really resist it. So I'm going to change their names that identify them with the gods that I serve, so that in a very subtle way, I can creep into their minds that my God is greater, and to worship and serve my God. And everything that was in the palace kind of, tinkled the senses enough to, hey, maybe his God is not so bad. Maybe I can worship and serve him. And so sometimes, you hear people say, it's not what people call you, but what you answer to. Yet we understand the importance of what people call you. That's why Nebuchadnezzar changed their names. in the Bible, when the Hebrews were given their names, it wasn't like a haphazard thing. It's kind of like how we do today, naming our kids after cars and things. Uh, they looked at the character of the child. They understood what they wanted the child to be, and prayerfully they would name their child after their God and characteristics that they saw in their child or that they wished their child to be. And so Nebuchadnezzar, as a pagan, understands this, and he changed their name so that religiously he might get their minds from their God to his God. Secondarily, physically, he gave them a dietary plan that he felt was good, that would make them physically fit, put them in a position where they will be able to stand in his presence. And also mentally, they will learn the science of the Chaldeans. And so with that understanding, how do we think that God wanting us to be in a certain position, we should, like them, stick out? That's why he said he gave us all of these laws, all of these regulations that you see in the word of God, is that we may be the head and not the tail. We might stick out. We might be head and shoulders above all that are in the realm because of the physical stature, health wise, mentally, religiously. We may stick out because of the things that God has given us if we follow this. Some of us think that the things in the Bible is kind of just a suggestion, it's a good option, but it's not necessary to our development to reflecting the loveliness of Jesus. But God gave us those things for a reason. And this is one of the things that sticks out to me when you look at the book of Daniel. We understand that if this pagan king had a standard for us to stand in his presence, God also expects no less of us in that respect. And I can continue and say more, but I know you want to chime in.
Yeah, thanks for that. You gave a really good overview of what's taking place in Daniel chapter 1. And a couple of pieces we want to talk about before we get into a few of the other texts that are there, because it's certainly a theme and a story that follows through. First, in the beginning of it, we're down in the year 605 BC. It's important to be able to put a time frame to it, because these are ancient stories, but they have a lot of relevance and significance, in particular when we get into the portions that are prophecy. Those are, you'll see how it reveals prophecy, shows us what's to take place in the future, etc. So it's 605 BC. The Jewish nation has been humbled. But prior to this, so now Israel is going into captivity. Prior, Samaria is going into captivity. And as you talked about, God had said that through Jeremiah and through the other prophets that they would be in Babylon for 70 years. That's a really long time. It doesn't matter what time period you look at, and you look at an epoch or span of 70 years, that is a long time. In that process, God still had a plan for them individually, and he had a plan for them collectively as his people. What was that plan? How did it look like? Well, you talked about God wanting them to be able to share the gospel, what we call a gospel, but a knowledge of him, the saving grace that was to be revealed. Certainly that was vital and important, but also to be able to make it known that this was for everybody, for all nations, and they had shut themselves up. But now through different practices, they're going to go in and 70 years. And Jeremiah repeated to say, when you go to Babylon, don't try to fight against the Babylonians. Don't try to rebel. Go ahead and submit, because in this, you are submitting unto God. And why is that important? It's important to note that God has a hand in the affairs of the activities that take place on earth. And I want to define that just a little bit. There are human options and human choices that we make, and we are free moral agents. God does not restrict events as to overrule them and to override them and say, okay, well, this is going to take place here, and all these events are ordered. People still have choices. They still have actions. But for our choices and our decisions, there are always consequences. And what he is telling to them is that because you would not do what I asked you to do in the promised land, now I'm going to chastise you. And so he uses nations to come and to chastise them. So he doesn't come down from heaven himself to bring retribution, but he sends chastisement to their gates. He sends the enemies to their gates to be able to subdue them, and that in the exile, that they would learn true devotion, that they would learn of righteousness, that they would learn of humility, that they'll learn of repentance, all these different things. And so when they went back home, that it would be a new life for them, a totally different experience. Number two, we also identified that as the the Hebrew worthies were there. We identified like the first chapter that there were several raids that Nebuchadnezzar made against the Jewish nation. In fact, he came against the city like 4 times. In his first conquest that we see here that is important, Daniel in his in a number of the better or the wiser Hebrews are taken back into Babylonian captivity. It's important also to note that when they go back, how their outlook is. You know, we can learn a lot by the spirit that we bring to bear to a particular situation. They are here through not necessarily any fault of their own, but they understand in the big picture of it that God is chastising the nation because of their iniquities, their transgressions. And what is the attitude of Daniel like? When we look at it in chapter 1, he is making the best of the situation that he's in. There's so many different trials that we go through in life that we make them worse because we're unwilling to take responsibility for our actions, and as well to be able to see how is God able to use this situation to his glory. How is he able to make me a better person through this particular ordeal? How am I able to learn more about him through this suffering? How can I maybe be a witness for him as well? And it's sometimes not all about those questions, but there are other questions also that are brought to bear. But we see that Daniel was handling the situation for practical purposes very well. And there's a lot that's going on because his world as he has known it, it is virtually ended. He's gone over into a different land, and the chance of him returning back to his homeland is probably slim next to none. Number 3, we also you talked about that he was made a eunuch in this. Isaiah prophesied that Hezekiah's descendants, some of them would be made eunuchs in the presence of the heathen. And so now here it is that Daniel and his companions are made as such. And so he has a lot of things that have taken place that are similar to Joseph some centuries before, who could look at his plight and look at the situation and blame God for all of it. You know, well, God, I'm trying to serve you and all these things happening. God, I'm trying to be true and faithful to you, and why is all this happening to me? But he has a different attitude, he has a different spirit, and he continues to look to God, knowing that the hand that seems to be brought against him in devastation is really a hand that is being brought against him in mercy and in love. And so his mentality there, as he's dealing with these things, it takes on a different purpose. And part of this we're clued into in verse 8, that it says that Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. And so he's made a decision that come what may, I want to be true to God. That come what may, I want to represent Jehovah in all of my actions and my dealings. So I don't know what is in front of me, but this one thing I know for sure is that I would like to be true to God by the grace of God. And so he makes this covenant, he makes this commitment to it. And so he's determined and bound that he wants to stick through and to follow through. And so this sets the stage for all that's going to transpire later on in the book of Daniel. And a couple of pieces as well that we see that Nebuchadnezzar, he takes in the vessels that belong in the house of God. And why is that important? Well, it's important because it comes up in some of the later chapters, but is making the note now that he has the things that belong to the people of God. And so as a nation, they have been humbled in the dust. They have been brought down low, and yet there's still hope that is there. And I think that's important for us because we will sometimes have those experiences that everything that we've looked to maybe has been taken from us. We've lost a whole lot, and we've been humbled in the dust. But where do we go from here? You know, do we still take consolation and solace in knowing that the invisible God is still with us and that he's not going to leave us, nor forsake us, nor depart from us? Or do we try to go on and try to figure it out on our own and try to come to our own devisings? And this is what, in essence, Daniel and his companions, they're brought to bear because of their commitment, because of their resolution, their purpose, but they made this covenant that we're going to be true to God, come what may. And that same theme follows over in other chapters in the book of Daniel. We start seeing it come when they are facing individual tests and collective tests. And this particular one in chapter 1, it starts off on this test. And so the idea is that the king, he wants these men, and he chose them the best, because he wants them to come in to serve before him, to stand in his cabinet. And now they're making a choice to say, the best things that you have provided for us, while we're thankful for them, we're not going to use them. We don't want to take of these things. And so to do so, it put the master of the eunuchs, Ashpenaz, it put him in a bind, because it's like, well, he said, well, what the king gonna do to me If he comes to you, who I'm supposed to look after, and he sees that you don't look as good, you're not faring as well as the others, he's going to have my head. So he wasn't really anxious to go into to stand up for these young men. But when you covenant with God and you have a purpose that you want to try to do right, come what may, God is able to do something and to work on our behalf. And so we start to see this unfold with this backdrop that is really like a crisis now that they are experiencing, because they felt that they could not eat the food that had been offered up to idols. That was what their conviction was. Now, it's interesting that in the New Testament, that Paul says that essentially, hey, what is an idol? It's nothing at all. This is just something that's made by man's hands and so forth. But to them, they looked at this as what is being sacrificed. And this was the major issue, and they wanted to stand fast on it. And so to me, it's interesting to consider it, that there's some things that maybe in our own experience that they are major issues. And what they stood for, they believed in that this was wrong. If we eat this, then we're defiling ourselves. And so it's a question of, well, what was it? Certainly, if there were unclean foods, and that would certainly be unfit based upon the laws of what was kosher, what was non-kosher, etc. But then there's also an element that's introduced there of these things that were sacrificed, and these things that were offered unto deities. And so we know that, again, the deities, that was no issue there. But there's also a question that comes up a little later on that many scholars think that maybe it's dealing them with something that dealt with foods that were not to be eaten, that were forbidden. And so now they're making a choice, because they had other things that were an option, that they did not want to defile themselves by partaking of those things that they knew was contrary. So the king wants them to be in the best of shape, and they don't have an issue with that. They want to be in the best shape, but they recognize, well, the king's plan and what he will allow me to do to be in the best of shape, it goes contrary to what God's plan is, that wants me to be in best of shape. And as believers, then we take to the higher standard. There are many, many things that the world may say, you can do this, and this is totally fine. It's no issue with it. It's good. But when we look at the divine law, then the divine law might say, that's fine if you want to do it by the world standard, but it's not fine if you want to do it by heaven's standard. So the world may say that this is acceptable, but God's law may say, well, this is not acceptable. And so they make their allegiance, they show their fidelity to be on the side of God, even though they are the inferior nation, as it were, because they have been humbled, they've been brought captive into this strange land. But here they're still wanting to be true and faithful to that which makes them the people of God. So they are going to rest upon that, come what may. And so the story begins to unfold now that there's this choice now. They're able to get the sign off by the master of the wise men to say, well, hey, I'm going to allow you to eat this food, and we're going to come back and we're going to do a test to see what happens, what the results are. And let's see from that, if there's evidence enough, if there is quantifiable evidence that we'll be able to go through and to follow on this, or we're going to have to end this experiment, because again, my head is on the line and I'm not ready to die. I want to have a long, prosperous life. So if your plan works, fine. If your plan doesn't work, we're going to have to switch it and to change it. And we start to see, well, how does God minister? How does God intercede? How does God bring forth the blessing in this particular issue when his name is on the line and when his people are brought into danger?
Yeah, looking at this, there are, keys to victory. One of the things that people might miss, he said, the children which are of your sword. So all the children of Israel with Daniel that could have been, of the royal seed that was there, didn't choose to take the stand that Daniel took, and you don't hear about them. So they didn't stick out. They maybe chose to, hey man, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Hey, we here, so, and maybe they have been compromising all of that time. And also this, I want people to take note of this. These are young men, and you see parental fidelity being seen here. Their parents understood the prophecy of Isaiah, what he said. They knew that they was coming, where our children might become captives to Babylon. We don't know when it's going to take place. We don't know when it's going to happen, but we're going to prepare them that if that was to come, that they will be prepared for this crisis. And we understand that we might be facing a crisis. We have to prepare ourselves and our children for that which is to come. And so They understood the principles of God. They understood the word of God. They understood that dietarily we can't defile ourselves in this manner. This that sets the stage for everything going forward. If they don't take this stand, we don't have Daniel 2 through 12. It won't exist because they would have failed. And one of the things that we understand with this is where the key of victory. Yes, faith in God, but it said they purposed in their heart. This is one of the key elements for overcoming. We don't want to leave a crack in the door for temptation to enter, to where, when we purpose in our heart, when we sell it in the heart, come hell or high water, as they say, I'm not doing this thing. I'm not going to give in to this. I'm taking this stance. All right. That's how we have to be in our minds, that this won't be an option for me. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to, and we have it in chapter 3 where they said, listen, we're not bowing down to this idol. Now our God can deliver us, but if he won't, just let it be known, we're not doing this. And if they don't make this stance here, they don't make that stance there. And so this is very important. But I want to bring this point. I like this point. You kind of touched on it. So they went to Aspenas. God brought them in favor with this person. So they figured like, hey, I'm cool with him. Let me go to him and present my request. And that lets us know, yes, we can pray about something, but then we still need to take action. All right. So they took the action. Yet it seemed as though their prayer failed, because he was like, nah, bro, I will look out for you, but I don't want to endanger myself. Right. So I can't do it. And so they would have been like, hey, man, I tried. Right. I did the best that I could. They didn't stop there. The Bible tells us they then went to Melzar, another person who God brought them in favor with. Notice how God is working. God brought them in favor with these people. Yet their faith was tested because they went to this person and he said no. But they didn't give up and give in and say, hey, Lord, I tried. But they said, all right, that option didn't pay off. Let us try another option. And so they went to Melzar, and Melzar, they presented it to him. And he said, all right, I'll give you a shot. Boom. Faith rewarded, right? So all we have to do is do what we need to do, and God will add the blessing. Because 10 days is not a good enough time to really see a difference. But with the blessing of God on top of it, God rewarding their faith, there was a clear distinction between the two. And they saw the benefits of God's health plan versus the king's health plan. That God's was, mind you, this was somebody that was not in favor of their diet. This was somebody that thought the king's way was better. Yet he can testify and say, hey, that God's dietary plan was better than the king's. And we need to trust God's dietary plan, which is in the Bible. God has various different principles throughout the word of God that shows us his ways, his methods. And I want to end with this. I have to talk about this. So it talks about their education, right? They didn't put up a fuss and fight about the education that they were going to receive. They went and they took it. But the Bible talks about how here in verse 17, as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. In their education, we also see an example of faith and works and with the blessings of God, because God just didn't pour on them these blessings, just give them these things without them putting in diligent effort. They did the best that they could, exerted all of their mental faculties, studied, were diligent, and God added his blessing on top of it. I don't want us to read this to think that, they can be lackadaisical, they can be lazy, they didn't have to study, they didn't have to be diligent in their work, and God was just going to bless them anyway because those are my people. No, 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 no. Don't believe that. Whatever your hand finds to do it with your might. And so if you're going to do something, be diligent in it, be a hard worker, outwork anybody that's around you. Be faithful to that which God has called you to do. But this is just showing us that God will add his blessing on top. See, we work on addition. God works on multiplication. What does that mean? That means we may do like 5 plus 5. That's 10. When God does it, it's 5 times 5. That's 25. We may do it addition, 10 plus 10. That's 20. That's nice. But God says 10 times 10, that's 100. Would you rather have 100 or would you rather have 20? What it's saying is we can, in our own human strength, we may add to the abilities that we have. We may add to the strengths and the things that's there. But God is able to multiply that thing far beyond our capabilities by giving us special endowments, special gifts. And so that's what's presented here, that yes, they worked hard, but God added to them. God added and blessed them because of their faithfulness. Remember, he that is faithful in that which is least will be faithful also in much. He that is unfaithful in that which is least will be unfaithful also that which is much. So God's not going to add these blessings on top of them if God saw them being unfaithful in the least of these things. So we know that they were diligent in that respect, and we saw the result of it. 10 times wiser than everybody that came. Why were they 10 times wiser? Because God works on multiplication, right? Everybody worked hard. Everybody was diligent as they were, yet God added his blessing on top of them, and we see the result. And so I want the people to remember that, and all that you are saying to do, those of you who are young in school, maybe you're slacking off, maybe you're not taking it as serious, or you're entering into some type of business endeavor, or you have work, you're looking for, advancement, you want to be promoted and all of these things, but you're working like everybody else works. You're coming to work late, you're slacking, you're not being diligent and whatever, yet you want to exceed. No, God rewards diligent, faithful effort. So let us remember that in regard to just our life in general.
A lot of good stuff in there, and much more. Certainly, we can talk about. You get the picture, though, of how God blessed them because of their faithfulness. They were 10 times better. The king, when he saw this, he's like, "Look, keep doing what you're doing. Hey, if that works for you, keep doing what you're doing. I see a difference there. You're way beyond everything else that we have, far excelling, far exceeding." And so just remember, again, the stories that we read here, these are stories that are applicable for us today. Lastly, when Daniel is writing this is later on. This is after the fact. It's like some 70 years after the fact. He's coming back and telling this. So as we read through those things, not all these things are revealed. Then, like in chapter 1, it says that God gave Daniel wisdom and understanding of dreams and visions and so forth. Again, setting the stage of what's going to come down the road. God, when he blessed him with these 10 days, it wasn't then that he gave him understanding of visions. It wasn't then that he gave him understanding of dreams. And I think it's important to realize that God does not endow us with gifts today that we will need for tomorrow. He endows us with gifts for today that we need for today. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Tomorrow is a different blessing that God will have in store for us. So he's not going to give us something that we need for the future today. Now, he may be preparing us through different experiences to face events that will take place in the future, meaning that he may now be walking with us, helping us to cultivate trust, helping us to cultivate a better understanding of him and his word and so forth. But when we talk about divine gifts being bestowed, those come as they're needed. So rest assured, there are many people look and say, well, I don't know if I'll be able to go through this and face this and so forth. Well, that's not about what you needing to know and understand and face. It's not until the situation comes up does God then supply for the need that is there. We take care of today. God will bless us in today. And tomorrow, he says, look, don't take any thought of that because sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. So much more we can talk about again in this particular chapter, but we'll stop here. We'll pick up again next time in the second chapter of the book of Daniel. And we pray, as always, that you have been blessed. And so until we see each other again, remember to keep your heart with all diligence, because out of it are the issues of life.